In this presentation, we will look extensively at part of the software called the component tree. This is shown on the left-hand side of the screen within the Modeling tab of both vCarve and Aspire. It is a very important area of the software if you plan to work with 3D objects, as it allows you to control and organize them and dictates exactly what you see in the 3D view. This in turn will dictate what you machine when you come to calculate the 3D toolpaths. Now the component tree in vCarve and Aspire is essentially the same, so we're going to be working with the vCarve software. Towards the end, we'll take a look at some of the unique options to Aspire, so you have everything you need to know about the component tree in both vCarve and Aspire. Okay, so let's go back to the start and create a new session. So File, New. I'm going to be working with a part that is 12 in X and 12 in Y, XY datum in the lower left hand corner, and our modeling resolution set to high, and OK. Now we're going to move to the Modeling tab, which can be found at the bottom of the screen, and immediately you can see the range of modeling tools that we have in vCarve, which is significantly less than Aspire. Below that is where we see the component tree. Now by default we have a single level in the component tree. Now this is not a 3D object at this stage, it's just a way for us to organize our components, and it works very much like layers do in the 2D environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually tile my windows vertically, which I can do from the top menu. And as you can see, we've got nothing in the 2D view, and we've simply got the modeling plane in the 3D view, which is used as a visual reference to see where our parts are in space. At this point we now need to populate the component tree, so we need to add some 3D objects. In vCarve this requires us to import them, which we can similarly do in Aspire, but additionally in Aspire we have the use of modeling tools to make components from vectors and images. So I'm going to navigate down now to my clip art tab by accessing this from the bottom of the screen, and here we have a range of different clip art that is available. I'm going to select the plants and fruits, and in particular the first option here, which is to double click on the apple. This will then copy this into our workspace and put it centrally within my workspace. I'm now going to navigate back down to the Modeling tab. We can see that the component has been added as the first item under level 1 and is currently selected. It's also shown as being selected and instrumented in both the 2D and the 3D view. At this point I can now manipulate it by moving it around, scaling, rotating. So I can actually move it in the 2D view and it will update in the 3D view, and similarly I can move it in the 3D view and it will update in the 2D view. I can click one click in the background, will remove the instrumentation, and then a further double click will then completely deselect it so we can see just the item on its own. One of the most common things we want to do in the component tree is to control the visibility of an object we see in the 3D view. What we see in the 3D view is essentially what we're going to machine, and we refer to this as the composite model, and any item switched off in the component tree will not be part of that. So if we go to the component tree here, we can see the checkbox next to the individual component, and if I switch that off, you can see that disappears from both the 2D view and the 3D view. If I switch it back on, it reappears. What I'm now going to do is come back down to the clip art, and we're going to add a second component. So I'm just going to use the same apple, and we'll just double click there, and that's been located into the center of our workpiece. Go back down to the Modeling tab, and you can see now that we have two identical items that have been added. I can switch off the first item, or I can switch off the second item, or of course both. Switch them back on, and so I'm controlling each individual component there, but collectively they can be controlled from the level. And here we can see I can switch off the level as a whole, both items disappear, and then click back on and they both reappear. We're now going to take a look at some of the other items that we can control within the component tree. We've already looked at the checkboxes against each of the items for controlling the visibility, but just next to level 1, to the left of the checkbox, is the ability to minimize the level. If I actually select this now, it will collapse all the items under level 1, so they're not shown in the component tree, but hasn't influenced what is being shown in the 2D and 3D view, and consequently has no influence on what we're going to machine. It's purely to help with organization. If I'm not working on level 1, it might be worth that I actually collapse that level to make it easier to work with the items in the tree. Another item that is displayed and controlled within the component tree is the combine mode, and that relates to how the individual components link together to create the final composite model. To show that, I'm just going to expand the level, and we can see the constituent components beneath, and next to each name is an icon. If I hover over that icon, it displays the combine mode, and for both the two apples it's set to merge, as you can see by the same icon. But if you look to the level, we have a different icon there, and if I hover over, you can see the combine mode is set to add. We'll take a closer look at the different icons and the different combine modes and how they affect the finished composite model a little bit further into the presentation. Another item that we can control from the component tree is the name. So I can simply come into here and type in a different name against the individual item, but we'll do some more renaming a little bit further in the presentation. And similarly here, I can just select it and delete it. I can delete it just by hitting delete on the keyboard, but I can also undo, which I can say edit, undo, delete, and that item comes back. At present, we have shown you most of the ways you can control the component tree with the left-hand mouse, but what about the right-hand mouse? In particular, when we start to add lots more components into the component tree, it may be beneficial to change their names. As shown here, we have two components with exactly the same name. So if I right mouse key over the first apple and go down to rename, I'm actually going to change that and call that apple 1. And similarly for the second apple added, I'm going to rename that as apple 2. So we've had a look at how to rename a component using the right mouse key menu. Now let's look at some of the other options that are available. So I'm going to right mouse key over the Apple 1 component to show the menu, and at the top we first have combine mode, which relates to how these components interact together to create the composite model. There's different options: add, subtract, merge, lower and multiply, and we'll explore some of these with a more complex model later in the tutorial. Moving down to 2D preview, this really relates to how the 2D images interact together, and we can actually move certain images backwards and forwards to help with selection. So in this case, Apple 1 is in front of Apple 2, so I can actually move that back now, which will move the image behind that for Apple 2, and likewise I can come back now and move that to the front. Moving down, we can actually copy these individual items. So I'm going to copy Apple 1 to the clipboard, then come back up to the top menu, edit, paste, and this will be pasted into level 1 with the same name but with the suffix with the brackets 1 brackets afterwards, denoting that is a copy of Apple 1. I'm just going to delete that out of this particular level, come back down and reselect Apple 1 and go down to duplicate, which essentially will do a copy and paste. And you can see that it's created a new model, the same name, Apple 1, brackets 1, brackets, denoting the copy of Apple 1. Just going to delete that out. The following option now is rename, which we've already shown. And then below that we've got really two visibility options. So under show, we've got to show this. For instance, if it was switched off, you'd select this option to switch it back on. You've got show only this, which will switch off all other items except this item. Show all but this, so switch that off and keep everything else on. And then of course to show all. Similarly with hide, you've got hide just this item or hide all. Now below that we've got properties. So if I click on properties now, it will bring up the component properties for this particular model, which I can then look at modifying some of the parameters to change its shape. Similarly, this can be accessed by selecting the component itself and then coming back up to the wrench at the top to raise the same form, and similarly can also be done by double clicking on the item from the menu, which will bring that up as well. So different ways that we can access the same component properties depending on what we find easiest. And finally, at the very bottom, we've got move to level. So essentially we can take an item from one level and move it across to another one. We've explored the menu options available against a particular component, but now let's look at those available against the level. So I'm going to right mouse key against level 1 there. At the top we've got combine mode, so similar to the components we can change the way the levels interact. Add, subtract, merge, lower and multiply, and these will be explored in a more complex model later in the tutorial. We've got mirror modes, particularly useful when building tiles. And now it's a couple of display options, show and hide. So under show, we could show this if we're switching it back on. We can show only this if we want to switch everything else off, except show all items except for the current item or current level, and then of course show all. Underneath that, you've got the ability to hide this level or hide all levels. Underneath, the ability to select all the components associated with that level, which might make it a little easier for selecting, particularly when working with multiple components, and the ability to insert a new level. So let's insert a new level here now, and you can see that's created a new level above level 1, and I can now right mouse key to delete that level, so it's quite easy to insert and delete. And consequently, another option is to rename. So I'm going to rename that level now, and this one is going to be called apples. Just like with components, we can also look at the properties of a particular level by selecting the level and then going up to the wrench, and we can look at the component properties related to that particular level. Before we look at a more complex model, let's look at the different ways in which we can select a component. 3 principal ways. Initially from the component tree, so I'm going to select apple 1. It's shown as selected in the component tree, and in the 2D view you can see it's selected the image, and in the 3D you can see that shown as red. If I double click into the grey background now to deselect, and now I show another way, which is to select from the 2D view. So I'm going to pick the same apple from in the 2D view. It's once again selected in the component tree, and has also been selected in the 3D view as shown in red. Once again, deselect with a double click in the background and move across to look at the 3D view. Now here we need to actually double click the item. So simply I can double click and that will select the apple in the 3D view. You can see it is selected also in the component tree and in the 2D view. And I can go ahead now and select the item again, which will bring up the instrumentation, and I can do that either in the 3D view or I can do it also in the 2D view. At this point we've explained all the basics of the component tree. We're now going to open a more complex and realistic model to see the effects that those controls have on a composite 3D model. So with this I'm now going to close the file and open a pre-created file. In this case it will be the crest example. You can see immediately on the screen that it's a more complex model, and we have a number of components that we can select from that 2D view. So firstly I'm going to tile those windows vertically so we can see the 2D view on the left and the complex 3D view on the right. I'm going to move down now and look at the modeling tab, and we can start to see all the levels and components within that component tree. And immediately we can see there are 3 levels and 9 components shared across those 3 levels. So this represents a more realistic part where we can start to look at some of the controls that will influence the finished composite 3D model. Now what we see in the 3D view relates to the order these components are in, the order of the levels, and the combined modes that are set for each of these components and each of these levels. The first thing the software does is calculate what the subassembly of each level looks like. So it looks at all the components on a level and then combine those together. It will then take the result of each of those levels and the combined modes for each, starting at the bottom and working up through the component tree, and will effectively blend those objects together, adding, merging and subtracting, or whatever combined mode that we have set to give us the composite result of what we see within the 3D view. Now let's take a look at the contents of each level. Before I do that, I'm going to switch off the whole component tree itself and then come back and switch on just level 1. This is just the shield. We've got level 2, which has 5 different components on, and then level 3. And all 3 of these levels are being combined together to produce the finished composite model. So let's go down now and have a look at level 2, and I'm going to switch on just the 3 feathers. So I'm going to show just this item. Okay, and now I'm going to switch on the one above it, which is the crown. As I switch the crown on, it's being combined with the 3 feathers based upon the combine mode of the crown level, which is being currently set to merge. if we have a look more closely, you can see that the crown is being merged with the feathers. There are some areas of overlap which are shown in green here. This is showing areas of a component that are obscured by another. And now if we come back to the component tree and change the mode of the crown from merge to add, you'll see that we get a completely different model now. You can see the crown has been added on top of the feathers, which is not giving the desired effect. So rather than merging and taking the highest Z value of either of the two models, we've got the addition of one on top of the other, which isn't giving a realistic look. So the crown should be merged with the three feathers to give the desired effect. Now if we look to complete level 2 by switching on the remaining three components, which are the three fleur-de-lis, so we're going to switch each of those on now, and they are being merged in with the items below. So I'm just going to zoom out now so we can see those items and just swing around so you can see that it's taking the highest Z value of those items and merging together to create the required effect. And then moving from there, I'm going to switch off level 2 now and look at level 3. So we're going to start with the banner. I'm just going to switch the banner itself on and just show that item on its own. And we can see that item there. And then look to see how we're combining it with the two other components, with the two flourishes. So we can see that the first of the two flourishes is being merged with the banner. So I can switch that on there and we can see that's being merged rather than added. And likewise with the second of the two flourishes. So we've got three individual levels, each with components within those separate levels. And now we're going to look at to see how those three levels together combine to create the finished composite model. So I'm just going to switch off everything now, and we're going to switch on just level 1. So that shows just the shield basically. And now that mode is set to add, as is level 2. So level 2 is going to be added onto level 1. So I'm going to switch on now level 2. So we can see that the subtotal of everything on level 2 has been added on top of level 1. Now moving up to level 3, and notice that the combine mode for level 3 is not set to add, but set to merge. So if I switch that on now, we can see that the banner, rather than being added on top, is merged in with the shield, which creates this sort of desired effect that we're looking for, where the shield is sort of passing into the banner. As well as the combine mode, the order of the levels will have a dramatic effect on the finished composite model. As we've stated before, we're working from the bottom to the top, so we're currently looking at the combination of level 2 being added onto level 1 and then level 3 being merged with the result of level 2 being added to level 1. Now we can quite easily upset that balance by moving the levels around. So I'm going to take level 1 now, which was the first level, and move it up to being above level 3. So essentially it will be the last operation, level 1 interacting with the result of level 2 and 3. And immediately you can see from the 3D view that we've got quite a dramatically different finished composite model. So what I'm going to do now is just switch off all the levels so we can dissect exactly what's happening. So let's start with what would be our first level, which is now level 1, which happens to be the feathers, the crown and the three fleur-de-lis. Now if we move up to level 3, level 3 now, which used to be the final level, is now the second level and is being merged in with level 2. So the combined mode of level 3 is set to merge. So if I switch that on now, you can see that the two levels are being merged together. And then finally we're going to come up to level 1, which was the start point, which was the shield. And basically the shield is going to be added onto this result. So essentially the whole of the model will be lifted up by the height of the shield. So I'm going to switch on level 1 now. And now we've got the finished effect from having the levels ordered in the way with level 1 being applied last rather than first. So as you can see, the order of the levels plays a very important role in the finished composite model. So I'm just going to now take level 1 and move that back below level 2. So I just need to move that down just below the wording level 2, and that'll pop that back in now to be the bottom, and then we get the correct order and we get the correct finished composite model. As well as the order of the levels, the combine mode itself has a big influence over the finished model. So with level 2, which is currently set to be adding on top of level 1, I'm going to right mouse key over the level 2 and change the combine mode to subtract. And immediately you can see that the subtotal of the items on level 2 are being subtracted from the shield. So we've got a negative effect there. So rather than being added, they're being taken away. And now I can simply just change that back now to being add, and we've got back to having the desired effect. So in essence, the order and the combine mode of the levels is very important and directly influences the finished composite 3D model. Now, one other entity that you'll see in the component tree, which we haven't looked at yet, is groups. Now, grouping is important if we want to interact with a set of objects as if they were a single component. So we need to group them together. So let's take a look at all the items on level 2. So I'm just going to select those now together and right mouse key and group those as one item. You can see that it's immediately collapsed into one single item, which I can rename, of course. So I could call this decoration, and then expand that, and we can see the 5 components that form that group. Now that group as a whole then can be selected as one single entity and manipulated as one single entity. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that and bring that back into its position. At this point, it concludes everything that we can do in VCarve, and now we're going to take a look at the extra features that are possible through Aspire. So we've opened a new session of Aspire, and now we're going to go and open the same file. So we're going to take that crest example that we used in VCarve and immediately go down and look at the modeling tab. Instantly you can see this is quite different from VCarve in the fact we have access to a lot more modeling and model editing functions at the top of the left hand side, which has pushed the component tree a little bit further down. But the key addition to Aspire is the ability to be able to export the components and levels as 3D clip art. So I'm going to go now and select just maybe one of the items there, one of the flourishes, right mouse key now, and you've got the ability to export as a 3D clip file. So that will create a .3D clip, so a single component, and similarly I can do that on a level, and right mouse key export the whole, all the components within a level as a 3D clip. So that will be a single grouped entity that when imported will be a single entity that I can then ungroup into the constituent components beneath. So that brings this presentation to a close, where we've taken an extensive look at part of the software called the component tree.